Well, hello, everyone. It's John Lockland here. I'm the director of Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. I'm delighted to say hello to my co-host, Peter Lavelle, who's joining us from Moscow, and to our main guest, who, like me, is in Paris, Marc Fromager, former director of Aid to the Church in Need, and our other co-host, Jeremy Nell, who's just joined us from South Africa. We are meeting today to discuss the death of Pope Francis, and of course to speculate about the future. I found myself giving an interview to RT on Monday, the day that Pope died. I don't often, in fact, I almost never comment on Catholic matters, but I said that I thought that Francis's pontificate had been very damaging. I expressed, although of course we shouldn't speak ill of the dead, I was asked to say what I thought, and I said that he had positioned himself as a progressive pope, and that's, of course, how the world understands him, an understanding which is encouraged by the fact that, of course, the papacy is an elective office. So there is, as everybody knows, a conclave which will elect his successor. And that makes people think that it's a bit like electing a politician who is brought to power typically to introduce reform and new policies. And my argument was that that's not what popes should do. They should instead, on the contrary, preserve tradition. They are the rock on which the church is built. It's not their role to bring in anything new, but instead to remind people of the rather difficult teachings of Christianity. And I also said that this was a shame because there's lots of progressivism. In fact, there's progressivism everywhere in the world, practically, or at least in the West. And I said I would have been much happier if the Pope had, the late Pope had given a more unique, a more special message, which would have been, let's say, traditional and not progressive. There being so much progressivism always. So rather than asking you a question specifically, Marc, can I just simply say, is that your view as well? Do you share my critical a view of Pope Francis? Go ahead, Marc.
Well, John, yes, I must confess, and surely I will need to go to confession, that when I learned Pope Francis's death, my first reaction was more of some sort of relief. And as you said, I mean, we shouldn't speak badly about a pope. So this is not about the person, but doing some sort of end of a pontificate, 12 years of reign analysis. I since the beginning, actually, since the first evening on the loggia in the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome when he was elected, I got a bad impression of him, and this bad impression, unfortunately, was during 12 years more or less confirmed. There was some good things. There were some good things, and maybe we'll be able to speak about it a bit longer afterwards. But globally, I think one of the most important missions of the Pope is to strengthen his brothers, to strengthen the faith of the Church, and most obviously that is not what he mainly did. He was quite liked by the media, which is already an alert, some sort of, I mean, if the media who are not Catholic or not even Christian or mostly actually anti-Christian like a pope, that's not a conclusion, but at least we should be aware. And on the other side, a lot at least of Catholic people were a little bit confused during this pontificate. So all that sums up to some sort of negative approach, certainly, in spite of, once again, what I said, some positive things that he did, nevertheless.
I mean, one of the things that I feel, and I've felt this now for many decades, is that the papacy itself is in trouble, by which I mean that ever since John Paul II, whom one might appreciate for other reasons, there's been such an excessive media concentration on the popes, on the papacy, that the occupiers of the throne of Peter, it seems to me, have turned themselves into media personalities. I think this was even truer of Francis than of his two immediate predecessors. But I think I used to have a priest, an American priest friend in Edinburgh, who said that papolatry was the new sin of the modern Catholic Church. This worshipping of the person of the Pope. Do you think that? Do you think, Marc, that this problem runs deeper than just Francis?
It's a good question, actually, but how to do otherwise? I think this is linked to our world, which is all about communication, and since, of course, internet and the social networks, etc. I mean, the church has to be present in some way. I don't think the papolatry, as you said, increased among the Catholics. The question was always the link between the outside media and the Catholic Church. Now, I was 9 years old when John Paul II was elected, so I don't really remember. I didn't feel that concerned at that time. So I've only followed two elections for the moment, which was Benedict XVI and Francis, obviously. So this is the third. I'm quite excited, actually, about this, in spite of the fact that 80% of the cardinals were created by Pope Francis, which is also some sort of worry, but we'll see. John Paul II was very much into communication. That's true, with the World Youth Day and big events like that. That had some sort of impact. I think a big impact, actually, and also his fight against communism. Well, we're not going to say everything he did, but for me, it would be a bit complicated to say the Catholic Church shouldn't be in the media, on the other side. So, unfortunately, I mean, if we like it or not, this is how the world runs now in some way. But I think where I agree with you is that the Pope shouldn't try to be in phase with the media or loved by the journalists, because and I think that's what Pope Francis did most of the time, and that is a bit dangerous for the Catholic faith, I suppose.
I think what was really, at least from my perspective, what was dangerous, and is a trend that I saw growing up in America, to be a Christian was to be a good person. If you're a good person, that's what it means to be a Christian. And it seemed to me that Francis kind of, continued that perception that has nothing to do with Catholicism whatsoever. And I think that was the message I got from the entire pontificate. I mean, to be honest, gentlemen, I took no interest in this pontificate at all. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, his speaking out on Gaza and the plight of the Palestinians, I surely appreciated that. I did. I mean, and I learned things over the last 24 hours that I didn't know before. And maybe I shouldn't have blocked out this pontificate so much. But it just seemed to me the message of the Gospels was just completely diluted. I mean, if you're just a good person, then everything is going to be great. Well, that has nothing to do with Christianity.
But can I jump in here with a question?
Go ahead, John.
John, you started with the sort of the role that the Pope should play. And when I think of Pope Francis, I think of his LGBTQ comments, climate change commentary. I think of the vaccine, how he, I think it, he told people to get the jab. Yeah. That I'm guessing is not within the role of the Pope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing in the creed about COVID vaccines. You're dead right.
I must say,
but I think once again, I agree with you, Jem. I agree with your question. I think that he did that far too much. He was noted for all these interventions in the secular in the secular realm, on issues of public policy. But I've detected that trend over previous pontificates as well. I think he aggravated an already existing problem, and I think it was a very serious one.
But let me add.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me just expand on that. Then what what should the next Pope's role actually be?
Well, can I, instead of answering that myself, hand the floor back to Marc? Because Marc, you just said that you were excited about this next conclave. Why?
Well, the first reason is that even if we are praying for his soul, we are going to have a new pontificate, and that already is for me a good news. Just to finish, well, not to finish, but to continue the list of what you were saying, the COVID vaccine, and all these political stances that he always had, which is not, I mean, his priority as Pope is once again to strengthen the faith of the church. There's another thing, his insistence on migrants. And so maybe he was always presenting himself as a migrant, Italian family in Argentina. Okay, but that has nothing to do with what's happening today in Europe. And he was just only always pro-migrants and making some sort of distortion to the gospel, where we have this poor guy, the Samaritan, who helps him because he's alone, and etc. And from that, stretching out to a total pro-migrant policy, which doesn't make sense in what's happening today in Europe and in many parts of the world. That was.
Well, how does immigration strengthen the faith?
Well,
it doesn't. I'll answer my own question. That's why I was irritated by that papal bull as well.
Well, I think it wasn't a papal bull, as far as I know. It was just.
Well, it was. I'm not I saw it this morning. My Latin isn't that great, but.
No, I don't think there was any authoritative document, was there, on immigration?
I think there was. Well, anyway, we don't need to waste time on it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think the worst thing that I mean, I agree that that's also bad because it's a matter of public policy and a very sensitive one. But I think that the worst thing that he did by far is to go to sign a joint document with a Muslim cleric and say that the multiplicity of religions in the world was a gift of God. And that is absolutely something which no pope should ever do. And I think in earlier centuries, popes would have been overthrown by the cardinals if they did that, because his role precisely when faced with a Muslim cleric or cleric from any other religion is to explain why he thinks his religion is true and the others are not true. But to dissolve it all away into a meaningless ecumenism is an act of betrayal, an act of treachery, really. An act of heresy.
George, actually, you're muted, George. There you go.
But he did that on other things, to be honest, because I mean, yes, he did this thing on Islam, but I remember he had these pagan monuments in the Vatican. I mean, which really upset so many people within the church, so much so that some priests actually picked it up and then dumped it into the Tiber River. And then he issued an apology, not for having this pagan monuments inside the Vatican, but that the offense that it caused to dump this in the river. But this is really the problem with him, is that he actually deliberately went out of his way to antagonize people. I mean, if you go back to the 2016 election, he took strong objection to Trump's position on immigration, and then shot his mouth off by saying that he wasn't a Christian. And then, of course, Trump then returned, reasonably saying, "Hey, well, who are you to go around saying, whether I'm a Christian or not?" And then recently, when he wrote this letter to America's bishops, he specifically addressed, very, very specific, addressed Trump's deportation policy, and started talking a lot of hooey about how this is, again, this is somehow an unchristian thing to do. And really, he went out of his way really to antagonize members, obviously, of the Catholic faith. And even in terms of what does it do for the church, his stance on LGBTQ plus issues, particularly on his claim that that it's perfectly okay to bless gay couples. This infuriated, Catholics in the part of the world where the Catholic Church is actually growing the fastest, namely in Africa. So much so that he had to kind of back away a little bit from that, because obviously it's just causing absolute fury in Africa. So by taking these controversial stances, he actually wasn't doing anything to advance, the cause of Catholicism.
Marc, do you think that there's a feeling in the Vatican, within the College of Cardinals, that this went too far? Is there any hope for a correction, at least?
Let's hope. I mean, I don't have the personal ear, to what all the cardinals believe or think today. Some of them must be even more excited than me, because one of them is going to become the new pope. But the history of papacy or the church has always been like going from one side to the other. Maybe Pope Francis went, let's say, we think, but we can say politely, certainly a little bit too far on the progressive agenda. That's being very polite, obviously. So it depends who is going to be elected, but certainly that we will have somebody that will try to, let's hope at least, support the faith, because once again, that's the first and most important mission of the Pope. I just wanted to add something about Islam, because we were talking about that. On one hand, we can say that he tried to make bridges with other populations, and Islam is a growing threat, like in many countries in the world, in Europe, even in Africa, where the pressure is increasing. So either we make a new crusade, either we try to speak to these people and we give a testimony of our faith. Why not? But then, obviously, and of course, maybe he went too far on certain aspects. I was working a lot in the Middle East when I was aid to the Church in Need, and with all the Islamic States crisis in the middle of 2015, all those years. And that was something that really shocked me with the Pope, where when he came back from Lampedusa in his plane with only Muslims, and he didn't take one single Christian. And then the Vatican was a little bit like the next day, what can we say to try to repair this? And they said that the Christians didn't have any papers like ID. And since when the Muslims had ID, that was, the excuse was even worse than the actual fact, And that was really a symbol, like, we're helping the Muslims, but not the Christians. And that's a little bit an image for me of this total pontificate, trying to go towards the others always, but not doing much for the Catholics.
I'd forgotten about that, but you're quite right. And you've reminded me, and I disliked that gesture for another reason as well, which was that he didn't even put these people in the Vatican City State. He put them in, I think it was the Sant'Egidio community in Trastevere. So he didn't even take them into the territory of which he is the head of state. If he'd put them in the Apostolic Palace, then you could have said, well, that is a very substantial gesture, in favor of refugees. But he actually pushed them off to someone else, in this case, to Italy.
Marc, can I ask a question? I want to just go back to the question I asked earlier, because I'd love to know. I'm not a Catholic, and so for me, it's quite interesting to see, that if one were to accept that the West is imploding and having a tough time, one should also accept that Christendom is tightly integrated and interwoven into the West. So we wouldn't want to see Christendom falling as part and parcel of the West falling. So with that in mind, the Catholic Church clearly stands as some sort of bastion of Christianity internationally. And, as a non-Catholic, I can see that. What then, in your opinion, should the next Pope be focusing on?
Well, I've already said it twice, but I can repeat it just as an introduction to as an answer to your question. He should strengthen the faith of the Church.
No, but what does that mean? Sorry, well, what does that actually mean, though?
Well, he should try to just reinforce our faith, like what we believe in, and not make confusions, doctrinal confusions, trying to reach out, but then having everybody lost, like the Catholics first and other Christians also, because like the Orthodox, for example, I think they respected Benedict XVI a lot, but they have a lot of difficulty understanding what Pope Francis wanted to do or to say. Once again, I'm being polite. I think they really disliked him. So that's reaching out. But the first thing is that the Catholics, I'm not saying they should get into some sort of ghetto, but at least be aware and proud of their own faith.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because what I felt offended by is that we had Pope Francis reaching out to the world, compromising in ways that I thought were just antithetical to the teachings, and ignoring Catholics. I mean, real Catholics were being ignored, and I think I was really irritating. He didn't speak. I was brought up Catholic. His entire pontificate, he didn't speak to me once, not one word. He needs to speak to the church itself instead of looking further afield. The Roman Catholic Church is going to survive the West. Okay, I'm not really worried about that. Okay, and I don't think it should be the church's worry either, because it controls that rule over us in the West. Okay, but I think the first step would be to address Catholics, because I think Catholics have been ignored.
What good things do you think he did, Marc? I mean, you mentioned briefly in your first answer. I mean, I've got one or two ideas, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Oh, please do, because now I have to say something.
Because you can't remember any. Okay, well, I'll go. The two I have in mind were, well, he met, of course, the Russian Patriarch in Cuba in 2016. And that led actually to a rather witty remark made to me by, probably you know who I mean, Marc, Monsignor Vac, the head of the Institute of Christ the King. He said at the time, oh, we used to pray for the intentions of the Pope and for the conversion of Russia, but now I want to pray for the intentions of Russia and for the conversion of the Pope. But anyway, that was a positive step. And then, of course, I think it was in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, there was a rather touching prayer for peace in the square outside St. Peter's Basilica, just as Britain and America were gearing up to bomb Syria. And he did it in, I thought, rather a charming way, which did actually speak to me as a Catholic. He brought an icon from St. Mary Major, Santa Maria Maggiore, into the square, an icon of Our Lady. And there was a long, very prayerful session, which he attended and prayed at and so on. And there were plenty of people in the square. And it worked, because a day or two later in the House of Commons, the British attempt to vote for that war, the British government's attempt to gain parliamentary approval for that war failed. And the whole bombing attack on Syria unraveled, because one thing led to another, and the French then said, well, we'll do it with the Americans, but the Americans pulled out, and the whole thing disappeared. So that was perhaps an example of the efficacy of prayer.
Yes, I can follow up on that, because once again, I was very much in the Middle East at that time. And actually what happened, that was beginning of September 2013. So he had only been Pope for like 6 months, a bit less. And we were really on the verge of like World War III, because the Anglo-Saxons, the West generally, was wanting at that time to totally destroy Syria.
It wasn't just the Anglo-Saxons, Marc. François Hollande was
and the West.
And
the West, I said, because, well, France since that time was just only following Americans, so that's the problem. But the thing is, Russia didn't want to back down, They were played in Yugoslavia, in Libya, and in Syria. They said no, and they had already hypersonic missiles. And actually, the attack started more or less, but then there was a counter attack from Russian missiles, and that's where Obama finally said, "Okay, we shouldn't go there." And then he called François Hollande, because we were really like minutes away from bombing Syria. And that stopped everything. But we can say that certainly the Pope's intervention at that time did have some sort of effect, and we must consider that he did his job that day. Other positive things maybe that we can say, like on some major topics like abortion and euthanasia, he remained Catholic. I mean, I think we can't say that he made a strong distortion on those matters. I mean, unless I'm not aware. But that's a bit surprising, because the media shouldn't like him for that. But on those topics, he didn't do unorthodox things, I don't think. Another positive thing, maybe the whole image, but the problem, it was a lot of images, a lot of communication, but still the idea of a field campaign, a field hospital, the church being a field hospital, and that was like taking into account that the world today is some sort of a big wreck. People are a bit lost. Obviously, one solution could be to propose the faith in a clear way, but at least already understanding that people have difficult lives, are a bit lost, and that the church should not only just say this is the faith you should follow, but trying to reach out to people as like this field hospital. There are some interesting things in spite of all we said in that sense.
But he also, on the war in Ukraine, he didn't follow the NATO EU line. He's very much stuck to the position, first of all, that the war was provoked. He actually said that the war was provoked by NATO expansion. And then he said that the story of the war is not Little Red Riding Hood and the big bad wolf, for this easy, facile moralizing, that doesn't apply. So he stuck to his guns. There was a lot of pressure for him to follow the sort of the NATO EU line. He refused to do so. Now, on the other things about the abortion and euthanasia, I remember when he came to the United States, and of course, all the people, fell to their knees who are not themselves Catholic. All the Obama, all the morning show crowd, and all the TV pundits who just fell in love with him.
They wanted to be good people, George.
They absolutely loved him. And then he started talking about, gave an address, and so about the culture of death. Now, the thing about the culture, when the Catholics talks about, the church talks about the culture of death, they mean the three things: the death penalty, abortion, and euthanasia. And he said, "Oh, the culture of death." And then he said, and I turned to President Obama and said, "And I have to thank you for your vigorous, firm opposition to the death penalty." And Obama said, "Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm a good man because I'm against it." But he didn't mention the other two, because if he were to bring up particularly abortion, but euthanasia, which isn't such a big thing yet in the United States, if he had brought up abortion, boom, he'd have lost all of the the typical liberal New York Times crowd who were just worshiping him. So yes, I mean, he held firm on that line, but whenever he had an opportunity, which would have been a clearly decisive moment to make his stance clear, he went off and made the facile thing about, the death penalty. I think he knows all the liberals are going to celebrate you for that.
Mm-hmm. How popular was he within Catholicism?
Well, actually, I don't know if there's statistics about that, but globally, I mean, like in France, I could say maybe a bit better. The political background of the people has some sort of importance. let's say, left-wing Catholics, if they still exist, they would have been very much in favor of Pope Francis. But most of the Catholics now, not that they have a particular political agenda, but maybe their sensitivity is more right-wing, and including the youth, because we still have young Catholics in France. They would be more on another side on the political scene. And most of the Catholics I know, they were not very much excited by Pope Francis. And what we said in the beginning, I mean, most of them were even not only not excited, but confused by what he was saying, but by what he was doing, and also a little bit frustrated and certainly hurt by this impression that we had that he wouldn't care less about the Catholics, once again. And I'm not saying he should only take care of the Catholics, but maybe he shouldn't forget them totally.
Marc, an issue we haven't brought up here, and it was very important during his pontificate, is the sexual abuse. And kudos to him for addressing it. But a lot of people, a lot of disappointed Catholics felt that he could have done and should have done much more. Again, speaking to the laity about their concerns, that the laity were the victims, okay? And, there was some really high profile reprimands and firing, but it's one of the reasons why I drifted away from the church, to be honest with you. Scandal after scandal after scandal. And I just felt so disaffected. And I know a lot of Catholics felt the same way. And that was obviously a visceral issue. How do you think the history is going to, what is his legacy when it comes to that issue?
I suppose he didn't start the reflection or even the action on this topic. I mean, John Paul II and Benedict XVI already had started that. Maybe they didn't do enough. Maybe they didn't go far enough. Francis continued that. And it's true that during his pontificate, a lot of major scandals appeared, maybe more than before. It's not that he was bringing them up, but his continuous action after the two previous popes led to maybe this bigger transparency. Are things changing? I think so, because all these scandals, they often go back to the 70s. Beginning of the 80s, but essentially the 70s. And I was a kid at that time, but we should remember the cultural environment at that time was quite different to what it is now, and quite open to like this sexual liberation, including maybe inside the church. I'm not saying that's good, but a lot of scandals do go back to that time. I'm not saying that they aren't anymore. Certainly there are still priests or even bishops that are big sinners in that sense. But I think that the biggest volume, or like the biggest trend, does go back to those years, and maybe they needed some time to most of those people actually are dead now, to be able to speak about it. From the outside, it has had a very bad impact, obviously. But, I believe that a lot of people are looking for excuses not to believe. I'm not saying this is for you, but for example, just one example. I have a person I know, and he stopped being Catholic because he saw Da Vinci Code, this film where the Christ is supposed to be with Maria Magdalena, and then this film is quite critical to the church, and suddenly he believes this is a documentary or something, and suddenly he has an excuse for not going to church, And then for these sexual abuses, of course, we need to more transparency and to finish all that. But people are sometimes looking for excuses on saying, the church, this and that. And it's funny because they tend to believe that the Pope, the bishops, the cardinals, the priests are holy people. Well, obviously they're supposed to be holy, but most of them are sinners. I mean, like Pope John Paul II, he used to go to confession every week. I'm not saying for the same sins as what we are speaking about, but unfortunately, the church is holy on one side, and on the other side, it's composed of men and women who are sinners, and we have to really understand that, not to throw the baby. Come on, in French we say,
throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, that stuff. But let's hope so. Pope Francis, I suppose, did continue and maybe increase the action of the Vatican towards more transparency. Let's hope that that will. It will certainly continue with the next Pope. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Was Vatican II
George?
the problem?
Think George. Sorry, John, but I think George wants to say something.
Yeah, it was just on this topic, and which I want to ask Marc a question. I really don't know the answer to this, but as I was reading these stories about Francis, and I was obviously he was very friendly to to LGBTQ people, and on the doctrine of that, talking about blessing gay couples and so on. But then there was these instances when he used very derogatory language about sexuality, and it didn't happen just once. Where the first time, he just didn't quite know what this term meant, or very unlikely. But he used it several times, and so I kind of wonder, was that a reflection of what he really thought about it? So yes, he enjoys this enormous international reputation of his being the Catholic Church is now open to homosexuality, and then he talks like this in a very derogatory way about homosexuality. So I wonder, what your view on that is.
Well, that's only one other example of how the Pope totally lost most of the Catholic people. I mean, even if he believed that, if he believed that, that would already have been a problem. But speaking the way he spoke about it as a Pope is just not acceptable. When you have that kind of position, even if it was in the political field, but this is something else. This is the Pope or any very big spiritual leader. You don't speak that way. You don't use those words. I mean, you lose total respect from the people who are in your church, or even people that are not connected to you. I mean, if he wanted to make bridges with the Muslims, it wasn't speaking that way. If he wanted to be respected by the other Christians denominations, I'm not sure that was the best way. So as you said, maybe he got more media attention that way, like a rock star or pop star. That's the impression he gave sometimes, but that's not the first.
Well, Marc, do you think he grew into that, or he was pushed into doing that? I know something about his background. He was
language, just a straightforward language. What about language barrier?
Well, he seemed quite proficient when he needed to communicate. Okay, the popes always have a heavy accent, but okay. But Marc, did he grow into that role, or is that what it was expected of him? Because your first answer to us is that it was essentially that. The papacy is also a communications pivot for an institution and its ideology. But what is your sense in following his pontificate? It was just something he grew into. Did he end up liking it? What do you think?
I think, certainly when start becoming so famous and you're the head of the Catholic Church and you're in all the media, maybe that worsened. But I think it was already his personality. once again, coming back to the first minutes of his papacy, I was a little bit shocked, in the loggia, in the Basilica of St. Peter's, when he says, I'm just the Bishop of Rome. Well, no, actually, you've just been elected Pope, and this is not just about Rome, And actually, in Easter, we had this traditional blessing, Urbi and Orbi. So it's Latin, meaning for the city of Rome and for the whole world. And the Pope is not for just Rome; it's for the whole world. And he's saying, "I'm just the Bishop of Rome," in some sort of false humility. That's the way I sent it immediately, and trying to that way attract some sort of media friendship, that's the impression I
totally agree. I totally agree. And I found the fact that he decided not to reside in the papal apartments also a very bad decision. This again was, as you say, it was false humility. It was he was saying, "Oh well, I'm just going to stay in a 2-room flat in the Vatican Hotel."
I've already.
Sorry. And that's false humility, because the papal apartments and the splendor of the papacy, it doesn't reflect on the man. It's a reflection of the office, and therefore the man, even if he's not naturally born into that, should nonetheless take it on. It's part of the job.
Yeah, and also I've slept a few times in Santa Marta, so this building that actually John Paul II got built for the conclave, actually, which is just in the Vatican behind St. Peter's Basilica. And but once again, false humility, I think it's the perfect definition, because he was saying, I'm not in my gorgeous pontifical apartments, I'm in Santa Marta. But the problem is, with him being in Santa Marta couldn't welcome so many hosts. So actually, it was a big problem in the organization of having bishops and cardinals and even priests, or even some lay people like me for some Catholic organizations that used to get accommodation there. We were paying, obviously, but suddenly half of the building was not available anymore. So that's what confirms that when you want to make poor artificially, it costs more money than if you had just continued lived where he was supposed to live.
You had a question.
Yes. And I think you mentioned this in your RT interview, John, and I'm not entirely certain who to ask, so whoever can answer this best. But if we zoom out a little bit and looking at Francis's legacy, and perhaps, is there a connection to Vatican II, and is that considered a stain?
Well, I certainly consider it to have been an absolute catastrophe.
I agree.
And I think that one of the reasons, by the way, why Francis is worse than his predecessors is that he is a pure product of Vatican II. What I mean by that is that he was ordained a priest after the council and after the liturgical reforms, unlike Benedict and John Paul II, who had at least been ordained in the old church. So yes, I think it's. I think it's been a terrible catastrophe. It infects absolutely everything, including doctrine, but also, of course, liturgy and the general aesthetic and the general spiritual side of Catholic faith. And once again, I think that he was, the most pure expression of the spirit of the council, which I find profoundly negative. So yes, but funnily enough, Peter Lavelle and I were also taking it back further to Vatican I, but I'm not sure if we should go down that particular route. Go ahead, John.
So the next pope, could he be a further consequence of Vatican II? I guess he can, and could he pull it back slightly?
Or asked differently, how can he avoid not being a product of Vatican II?
I personally think it's extremely difficult, because the ethic of Vatican II, which the opponents of the council, Monsignor Lefebvre in France in first place, called the new religion, the ethic or the new religion, if it is a new religion, is now so deeply implanted that it would be very difficult to go back to it. And even if by some miracle a traditionalist pope were to be elected, I think he would have a great difficulty. Benedict XVI never, for example, celebrated the Latin Mass, even though he liberated it. Francis then cancelled that liberation. But he never led by example, Benedict XVI. And so I think it's very difficult to see how, because after all, yes, he's the Pope. Yes, he has immense power and influence. But, there are 5,000 bishops in the world. And most of them are obviously very much a product of the Second Vatican Council and believe in it and practice the new liturgy and the new religion that it embodied.
But what does that mean then for the future of Catholicism?
Well, that's. I mean, I think one of the problems you mentioned the West a few moments ago. The Catholic Church obviously is not the West. It is, on the contrary, universal, and it belongs to the whole world. But you're right to ask the question about the West, because obviously it's based in Rome, and its cultural roots are, yes, very much an expression of Western culture, which in turn is deeply influenced by it. But I suppose, without particularly knowing the internal operations of the Church, that they look at, these bishops and cardinals and the heads of the various dicasteries and so on. They look at the world and they see great numbers in Africa pouring in, and I don't know where else in the world they see growth, maybe in America, I suppose. And, from their point of view, those are the regions of the world to concentrate on. And those regions are probably less attracted by old forms of worship than certain Europeans are. So I guess they look at it, in that sense. I mean, it's, after all, it is their job. To be fair, they're not. It is a worldwide organization, and that, by the way, leads me on to an issue I wanted to raise, which is perhaps we underestimate how difficult the job is of being Pope. Because even if you've been an archbishop, you're running. Okay, he was an archbishop of I don't know how big Buenos Aires is, but it's presumably a fairly big city. I don't know what the population is, but I assume it must be a couple of million. So you're running, a territory, but it's no comparison. It's a change of order, absolutely incredible, to go from running, I don't know, a few 100,000 to 10, 20, 30, 100,000 Catholics and I don't know how many dioceses they have, how many parishes they have there in that diocese. But it must be an incredibly difficult job, just to speak about it in a very profane way, to suddenly then be in charge of over 1.2 or whatever it is, 1.4 billion people and thousands of bishops. I mean, there aren't that many organizations in the world that are that big.
Yeah, well, Marc, I mean, in Vatican circles, do they talk about their own deep state?
That's a good question. I'm sure there is a Catholic deep state, unfortunately. But just to answer to the question about the future of the Church, I mean, there are reasons to be a little bit worried, but at the same time, there is a promise on the Church. It can be weak and even very weak at some times in certain geographical areas. Like, for example, I mean, the Church was thriving in the Arabic Peninsula or in Northern Africa before Islam arrived and made everything disappear. Before the French Revolution, the Church wasn't in a very good shape in France, actually. And then there was the Revolution, which was totally anti-Catholic, and they killed so many priests. They transformed all the churches in whatever shops, and I mean, it was the end of the Church in France for a few years. And then 1 century later, at the end of the 19th century, you see so many Catholic congregations, so many vocations, and then the French missionaries, like 1 Catholic missionary out of 2 in the whole world was French. And this, you cannot see that at the end of the 18th century during the French Revolution. It's like not even imaginable, And so it's the same thing here. We can say, okay, the church in the West is quite weak right now, but as it has been said, I mean, look what's happening in Africa, in Asia, and in other places, and who knows? It can just come back to life. You know, for us, it's the body of Christ. And if you have been to Rome already, there's a big obelisk that was stolen from Egypt, but doesn't matter, and it's written. Vicit Leo de tribu Juda, which means what it means, the tribe of Judah will prevail, and there's also this part of the scripture which says this is Christ saying, the doors of hell will not prevail against the church. So at the end, we are going to win, you know. So it's better to become Catholic now, so you're in the right position, because at the end of the story, we win. Okay,
hedge your bets.
Yeah, but Marc says
Pascal's wager.
Yeah, well, John's already mentioned it, but Vatican I was a huge mistake. Vatican II was compounded the mistake, and what we've seen with the last few popes is a reaching out and embracing the liberal world and its temporal issues. And as neoliberalism in the West disintegrates and brings people down in societies, even cultures, can the church survive that? Because it's reaching out to it. Okay. I mean, George and I talked about this yesterday. The first thing George was saying, the New York Times really laments the passage of Francis. He said, yeah, that's the whole problem with the church right now. Okay. The New York Times loved Francis.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it can. I mean, Marc is right, Peter. Marc is right. France did have an extraordinary regrowth of religious practice in the 19th century. And by the way, so did other countries, including Britain. And you know better than I do, Peter, that is true of Russia.
Right now it is.
30,000 churches. 30,000 churches built in Russia in the 20 or 30 years since the end of communism. 800 monasteries opened in Russia. The figures are absolutely incredible.
There's a huge basilica just down the street from me, brand spanking new.
Yeah. And by the way, perhaps we can conclude on this, Marc. There's been, before the Pope died, there were a number of reports in the French press saying that the number of baptisms, adult baptisms mainly in France, has apparently beaten all the records. There are tens of thousands of people converting. That surprised me a lot, that information.
Yeah, it's not actually quite new. It's been already a few years, but it's really growing each year. And already last year was quite important. I think this year it was 25% more than last year. We're talking about, I think this year was 17,000. So this is not going out of 66 million people, totally changed the whole scenery. But it is surprising. And this is what I was saying before. I mean, Christ can always surprise us. And I think he will. Obviously, France is the eldest daughter of the church. So I'm sorry to say that all of you are not French, but if you can become Catholic and also French nationality, that would be good.
I think that was some
God will not be mocked, Marc.
That was an intervention.
Sorry about that. One thing about Pope Francis, because I think we're going to conclude. This was another disruptive thing, He never came to France. He came to Strasbourg and to Marseille, which are French cities. But each time he said, I'm coming to Strasbourg, I'm not coming to France. What? I'm coming to Marseille, but I'm not coming to France. What again? I mean, what are you talking about? You're coming in my country and you're saying I'm not coming in your country? And even for the nomination of cardinals, usually in the tradition of the church, the big cities like Paris or Milano or whatever used to have cardinals. The archbishops were created cardinals. And Pope Francis changed all of that. And he named cardinals some some bishops lost in the bush somewhere. Why not? Maybe they were holy men, and that's certainly a good idea also. But the thing is, all that came out of this constant disruptive approach of wanting to change everything, and that's another thing that we didn't really understand of him.
Could I just ask John, Mark, Peter, anybody? Do you have any sense of who's going to win? Who will be elected?
Well, he won't be African.
No, he might be African. I
wouldn't bet against it.
The traditionalists want
yes,
Cardinal Sarah, who is African from Guinea. So it's not entirely impossible. I think politically it would be quite a surprising move. What do you think, Marc?
Well, first thing I can say is that each time we say this guy's going to be the next pope, he always loses. So it's better to not talk about Cardinal Sarah, for example, because in that case, Cardinal Sarah, I would like that very much, but I'm afraid, first of all, he's nearly 80, middle of June, so maybe he's a bit too old now. And also, if you remember that 80% of the cardinals today have been appointed by Pope Francis, that certainly is going to be a bit difficult. In Africa, there is the Cardinal Archbishop of Kinshasa in Democratic Congo. That is one of the papabili. Otherwise, I don't know. Maybe Pizzabella, we were talking about him before, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem.
It can be favorite of Twitter because I love his name.
Yeah. Well, it's the end of Lent, so you can eat pizza if you want. There are a few names like that who could be symbolic also. Of course, including the fact that they are certainly good people. I mean, not good people, good bishops, good cardinals, and they have already had a very big pastoral experience. I don't know. I wouldn't want to bet on that.
Well, I remember when Bergoglio was elected, I was watching, I think it was the BBC, if I'm not mistaken. They were doing a live transmission, and when the Camerlengo, I've forgotten who comes out and announces the victor, the winner. There was a very embarrassing pause when they said Cardinal Bergoglio, because the BBC didn't understand what the man was saying, and they hadn't got him on their radar at all. So there was a long, embarrassing pause in the live broadcast. They had to quickly try and work out who it was who had won.
Well, to kind of end on a positive note, disruption can lead to great things. Okay, you might not see it at the moment, but maybe disruption in its totality moving forward is a good part of the mix. Okay, I don't think I pray for Francis, and I pray for the next guy.
Very good. Well, that's a good note to finish on. Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much, Marc Fromager, former Director of Aid to the Church in Need. And thank you to you, German George Samueli. And we'll see you all again next week. All the best. Bye.